It is training camp week 2 on the final dump. We're talking musical chairs at the offensive line spots, the future for Allen Lazard, the future for the rookies as well. Plus, we'll get into a little significant to some. It's all coming up on this edition of the final dump.
News dump.
News dump, yay!
News dump.
I mean, that's kind of a loaded question.
It's a landslide!
It's the final dump, presented by Game On Wisconsin. And welcome to week 2 of training camp on the final dump. There we go. We've got everything set up. Brendan Dworzinski, Matt Freilich here with you. Final dump brought to you by Game On Wisconsin. Back for week 2 of our second season, and we've got a bunch more to get to this week. As I mentioned in the intro, we've got offensive line to talk about, wide receivers, talk a little defense as well, a name that has gotten a little attention in the last 24, 48 hours, but really wasn't talked about much during the offseason, and we'll get to some significant to some passing game Aaron Rodgers props for today. Matt, important to note, not only is this week 2 for us, it is week 1 in the brand new Freilich Studios here for the final dump.
You know, I appreciate you calling that out, and I imagine it's quite different. So it definitely takes you by surprise. A little less cluttered, a little bit more on brand stuff. That's some canvas from a buddy of mine in Green Bay, Bo Thomas. If you've gone to Green Bay, you live in Green Bay, he literally does graffiti legally and gets paid for it all over the damn city. He just finished one on Broadway. That is a massive, I think, Brendan, it's probably 150 by 75 feet. Like, it's just absolutely huge. It took him like over a week, but anyways, shout out to him for that. But yes, the new studio, we are cracking in here, and it's great. It's nice to be settled in.
Well, it looks absolutely beautiful, as do you, as always. The reason we do video now is so we can get Matt's face on camera more often. But let's jump into it. We've got plenty to get to over the next hour here on the final dump. We've got lots of offense to start things off here. And let's start, Matt, with the offensive line. A little bit of a continuation from last week. We talked so much about David Bakhtiari and the fact that there's not going to be Elgton Jenkins coming up for at least a little bit. He's starting the year on the PUP after he tore his ACL last season as well. A lot of different pieces, a lot of different moving parts so far throughout training camp. We've seen Sean Ryan do some run with the ones, running with the twos on Monday. We've seen Big Dirt, Royce Newman, he's been moving back and forth inside and out. And this kind of connects to what we were talking about last week, doesn't it? About the fact that this group is going to need the ability to be versatile, to move into different spots. And I would imagine, frankly, it's going to be a hot hand situation for this team, at least in the first few weeks of the season, while you're waiting for Bakhtiari, while you're waiting for Elgton Jenkins, assuming that they're not ready to go for week 1. And I'm especially assuming that when it comes to Big E. So you've got to have a bunch of guys who are able to move inside, move outside. And I'll be honest with you, the one that I'm the most excited about right now, it's one of the rookies. It's either Sean Ryan or it's Zach Tom. Sean Ryan, who went semi-viral on football Twitter the other day for his aesthetic. I can't remember if it was Andy Herman who initially tweeted that out or Wes Hott or who it was, but he had the Guardian cap on his helmet. He had his shirt cropped all the way up. It was the peak male form. You might not like it, but that's what peak male performance is. You've got that, and he's shown some versatility early on. And the guy I mentioned last week as well, Zach Tom from Wake Forest, who, again, got some run with the ones, got some run with the twos on Monday as well. These are the guys, I mean, there's a reason they drafted these guys. It was planning for the future because David Bakhtiari is not going to be around for forever. There's been some rotation at the interior spots in recent years, but I think getting those guys important reps early in camp has really been the number one storyline for me there, obviously outside of the Bakhtiari injury.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've hit on it time and time again, I think, in this offseason, or at least I know personally, and even just the last episode on last Monday for Final Dump, the inaugural episode on the live stream, we kind of, I don't want to say beat that to nauseam, but it's really, really important. It's layered, right? It's not just, hey, maybe we have 6 starters or 6 guys that could possibly start. We whittle it down to 5. No, it's complicated. You drafted rookies. You have your 2 best offensive linemen between Elgton Jenkins and David Bakhtiari tweaked. You're still trying to figure out these pieces of guys that you've drafted in the last couple of years under the new regime that we mentioned last week. And it's you mentioned the hot hand. I think that's something to pinpoint on. I don't know. I mean, I like that verbiage, but overall, it just reminds me of last year. You had a lot of shaking parts, right? With Runyon, he was playing more inside, and then they had Royce Newman at right tackle for a minute, and Brent Braden was getting a lot of reps at, if you remember. Now we're seeing offensive line combinations, like you said. Zach Tom's getting there, Sean Ryan, Jake Hansen's getting reps at right guard. It looks like back-to-back days now. And truly, at the end of the day, it's an easy thing to do to find your 5 best if you've been building a team like this. So while it's interesting to see these different combinations, and it's great to understand you have this, I guess, this depth essentially, and that you can kind of wade the waters before you actually get your top 5 guys in there. It's cool to see where they slot dudes in when you think they're maybe like the backup, or it's like they're the third string at a certain position. I look at someone probably, I don't know. There's a couple guys that I just don't understand at all why they would get reps entirely. Like, I don't understand, like Jake Hansen at right guard makes sense. John Runyon at left guard kind of makes sense, but like, is Royce Newman really going to play right guard this year? I know he's a good backup there. There's sometimes when I see certain guys getting certain reps. Zach Tom was probably the first one that kind of surprised me getting reps last week. And it's just like, I like that they're getting these opportunities, and that's what you're trying to do in late July, early August. But it's kind of crazy to think like, okay, like I guess he could potentially play that position in a desperate situation in a fire drill. But that would be, I mean, I can't imagine the game would be going very well before that happened, and B, can't imagine the success for the Packers would happen much more longer if someone like that is holding down the right side for 30 minutes, 15 minutes of a game.
I think the point you bring up about how this is so much like last season, that you had to have guys who could rotate in, and at the drop of a hat, hey, you need to get in there. And sometimes that paid off and worked well. You know, Josh Nijman, who I'm going to get back to in here in a second, he stepped in, and we clowned him all last offseason or last training camp, not for any particular reason. I mean, I had no personal animosity toward him, but we just said, oh yeah, okay, Josh Nijman. Well, he came in and he played some really important minutes in games middle and end of last season. Then on the downside, you had Dennis Kelly, who, hey, pal, you need to get in there. And well, I think everyone is still questioning the offensive line decisions from the playoff game against the 49ers. But it was kind of a culture of, hey, you need to be ready, and you need to be ready at multiple spots at any time. So for Josh, left tackle, right tackle, you've got to be ready to go. Dennis Kelly, are you even going to dress for the game? You got to be ready to go. All those guys on the interior, dudes who can play. You know, Newman is getting snaps at right tackle now during training camp. He was an interior guy for the duration of last season. Guys at guard, center who can mix and match, move in and out. Obviously, you mentioned Runyon in there. You mentioned Hansen in there as well, who I know can snap and can play at the guard spot. You've got to have guys who can play in different positions. And I think it is a lot like last season, but I think that experience from last season can help this year as well. It's kind of a we've been there before situation. Generally, you talk about that with the playoffs, that, hey, super young teams, you might be super talented, but generally you don't fare as well in the postseason because you haven't been there before. I think it's sort of a similar situation here where, hey, most of these guys are back. Ryan and Tom, they're brand new, but Hansen's been around the team for a couple of years. Newman was a starter for pretty much all of last season. Nijman has been around for a while. I mean, all these dudes have had experience with Stenavich, with LaFleur, with this program at offensive line. So I think having guys who have had to go through the ringer in that regard already in their, albeit brief, careers does help. And that brings me to a guy like Josh Nijman, who got the number 1 reps at left tackle. And would you be comfortable with him starting the season? Like, I think that's more of a big picture question that gets brought down to a single player. But if you had to say, hey, David Bakhtiari is going to start the year on the pup, he'll be able to go week 7, but he can't play the first 6 weeks. Are you comfortable with Josh Nijman at your left tackle spot? I would give the benefit of the doubt that, hey, he did enough last season. I think he can hang on there. I was impressed enough with what he was able to do. So to me, the answer is yes, but I think that's sort of the big question here is, are you comfortable with him there? Are you comfortable with Royce Newman at the right tackle? It's a lot of really trial by fire here for some of these guys to open the season.
Absolutely. And I will answer your question. I just think it's kind of sparked something that you mentioned. Like we all dogged on Josh last year. Like, why did we do that? Like, why was that a thing we thought was, I mean, I guess we did see some reps in very, very short sample size, and I also understand the point of, like, you have David Bakhtiari on one end, everyone's coming off the high that is Josh Myers, or excuse me, Elton Jenkins. You're excited about these new guys like a Josh Myers. We've had solid decently solid guys on the right side for a number of years, or just dudes that you could swap in there were veterans, where Yash was, we all chalked him up as kind of a project guy, and you would imagine a project guy to progress and get better, and that just didn't happen. And then the game that his first game he played in the preseason, you got kind of beat around the edge, I thought, having been at the game, and Jordan Love kind of gets tweaked in his shoulder, and I was like, oh, that's just not good. If you can't protect the blind side of a guy, what worth are you? But I would feel comfortable about Yash being on the left, because ultimately you're not going to have two of your best offensive linemen. And what's the alternative? Like if someone was dead set and heard this stream or this podcast in any length, Brendan, and saw me in the streets of Green Bay and said, oh, I can't believe you think Josh should play left tackle. It's like, absolutely, I will debate you on that. So tell me who your left tackle is, and because I don't know who that would be. I really, really don't. I don't think it just doesn't make sense to rush either of those guys back now. If they are, all reports last week said Elton Jenkins is ahead of schedule. That makes sense based off of his youth and kind of some of the healthier, probably bones and ligaments he has compared to David Bakhtiari. We kind of mentioned that it was some age last week. David's able to go, which it seems like precautionary, but he's admitted, and other personnel on the team admitted, front office, saying that, hey, it was a little bit more serious than we expected. And there was a ton of information backing that up back in February. So it's the end of the day, if Yash was there for a game or two, that'd be great. I was already looking at the schedule earlier this week this weekend. They start, with, I believe it's Vikings, then it goes to the Bears, and then third game's Tampa Bay. Like, that's, if you could get through the first two games without have to have Yash at the left, I'd be really, really happy. Now, if we're talking about going down into Tampa and 85-degree humidity, et cetera, and you got guys like JPP blowing up the line, Shaq Barrett, who I believe is still there, Vita Vea, healthy Vita Vea, like, dude, you're gonna be in for a world of hurt if Yash Nijman's on that left side.
Yeah, and it's just sort of I don't want to say fake it till you make it, because I think a lot of these guys are good players. I mean, Nyman's a better player than we thought. And I vividly remember it was right before the first preseason game last year. We saw the list of 33 players who weren't going to play in the game. And we said, oh, okay, so can you really even take anything from Jordan Love, because he's playing with a bunch of dudes who are going to be, playing in the USFL the next year? And Yash was just the one we picked. And, well, he turned out to prove us wrong. And, hey, I've always said, if it works out for Green Bay, I am happy to be wrong about anything. I will gladly be wrong if it ends up turning out in a good way for the Packers. But it's just an assumption that, hey, we saw enough last year. Can you hold on long enough until the most talented guys get back? I mean, look, that happened at center last year, even beyond the Bakhtiari injury. When Myers got hurt, it was, all right, hey, Luke's Patrick, can you hold on long enough? And now he's in Chicago, and unfortunately actually got hurt at camp to start this week off. But beside the point, I mean, it was get by, do enough, as much as you possibly can, just to get by for now. And that's likely the situation the Packers are going to be in to open up this season. But moving on from the offensive line, staying with the offense, I want to get to the wide receivers here, because I think there's been so much, I know there has been so much discussion, so much narrative about how this team has terrible wide receivers. Aaron Rodgers is going to struggle a little bit more, and people aren't bashing Rodgers by any means, but there's going to be a lot of growing pains, or just straight up, this wide receiver room sucks. I cannot tell you how often, it's at least once a week, I see some clown on Twitter say, oh man, even the Bears room is better than this. Well, first of all, no, it's not. It's not even close. That Bears room is not even like early Vince McMahon 2000s XFL quality. Okay, that room is abominably bad. You've got a lot of potential in this group. I think that's really the big thing. You've got the Lazard, who's entering the hopefully prime of his career. Cobb is the elder statesman, and then you're going to rely on Romeo Doubs. You're going to rely on Christian Watson to make plays for you, not just this year. Obviously, they need to step up this year because it is a fairly thin room, but you need them to step up long-term as well. And we haven't gotten to see Watson yet because he's on the PUP list. We'll talk about Christian Watson, the second-round pick, in a moment, but Romeo Doubs has been a revelation to some. I think that's fair to say, maybe not to everyone, but he has been one of the early camp standouts. And I was just listening on Monday to Mitchell Schwartz. He was the former Chiefs and Browns offensive lineman. He was on the Athletics football podcast, and he said, no, there's actually value to be taken from guys, even without pads, before the pads go on, guys who flash at training camp. There is actually value to that because corners are still being physical. They're just not hitting you with their full strength. So yeah, if you see Romeo Doubs making a lot of plays, there is something to that. You can take some positive spin from that. And it has not just been one day. It has been regularly that Romeo Doubs has been going out there and has been making plays for this team. And you even got Aaron Rodgers, who comes out and he says over the weekend that Doubs has had a nice start to camp. He's getting a lot of attention. He's understated, very humble. And I think when we heard some quotes from Romeo Doubs talking in the locker room, we heard that as well. Rodgers feels good about Romeo Doubs starting off. And Matt, I do too. I don't want to get too intensely excited about this because it is camp. He is a rookie. There are going to be growing pains, but having seen him play a lot in college and now seeing at least a little glimmer of what he's got in training camp, I'm pretty close to jumping all the way on the bandwagon here.
And I don't blame you because, I mean, I did talk about this on Pack-A-Day on Saturday's episode, just so like sometimes there are those training camp darlings or the preseason darlings even where it's really people fall in love with them right away. And it's easy right now when it's a player that has zero expectation. He isn't the number one even player at his position drafted this year. Obviously, we're still waiting for Christian Watson. Like you said, we'll get to him a little bit later in the episode. But ultimately, like it's cool to just to start falling in love with a guy and see what his potential could be. And then it's even more gratifying when you have one of the best football players of all time, one of the best quarterbacks of my lifetime, Aaron Rodgers, giving the man his shine, because it really, really takes a lot to earn Aaron Rodgers' trust and his chemistry. And that's been notable throughout his entire career, from, the chemistry he had early on with maybe Randall Cobb when those plays would break down, or, just swapping out number one receivers or receivers that could be number one for a few weeks of a stretch between James Jones, Greg Jennings, Jordy Nelson, Driver. The list goes on and on and on. And you fade into this new regime and this new era. You have the NVSs of the world, the Equinemius St. Browns, who didn't, get as many reps as we probably would have wanted, Allen Lazard, Randall Cobbs. The list goes on and on and on. But not very often does Aaron Rodgers select a rookie or even a young player, first year, second year guy. It's maybe float around the league, a couple practice squads, maybe like an Allen Lazard, and give him his roses. And I think that's something that you can't discredit, because sometimes truly Aaron Rodgers is the biggest critic out there, whether it be on himself, whether it be anything in this world. Or in that locker room, which is fine. He holds himself to a standard. He holds other people to a standard. I absolutely respect that about him. However, he can be a kind of manipulative, if you will. So he might see that Romeo Doubs is having a success and maybe try to boost the dude's ego a little bit. If you really want to go that far, I don't know if it'd go that far, but I've heard him do it with a couple other guys. Jamon Moore was one that he had mentioned years and years ago, and we know how that went exactly. And at the end of the day, though, let's call it what it is. Doubs has had 4 or 5 good practices. I guess today, Monday, it wasn't all that great, just based off of how he did the previous 4 days, which is fair. But ultimately, he's going to continue to build and continue to steal reps from Christian Watson not being on the field.
And those are valuable reps to have. And that's not to say that, Christian Watson's going to be completely forgotten or, completely left in the dust going forward. He's going to have a role on this team once he eventually gets healthy. And again, we'll talk about his injury and Matt LaFleur's comments coming up here in a minute. But the fact that you're getting something is very positive, because again, this is a group that, as much as I don't think they are as bad as the narrative is made out to be, there obviously is still going to be some growing pains. There's no clear number one, so to speak, in this group, but you've got a lot of potential. And I think that's something that players and fans definitely latch onto. And, you mentioned Rodgers' track record of banking on guys and hyping them up during the preseason. You've got hits like Allen Lazard. He has been on Allen Lazard from the very beginning. He has said, hey, I love his game, his mentality. That's a plus. Lazard has been a very good player over the last couple of years. You also mentioned Jamon Moore, who was a terrible player. I mean, he was a Missouri Tiger, so the expectation should have been low, but that's beside the point. Obviously, it's hit or miss. Not everyone's a perfect judge of talent, but I think there's enough signs that, okay, the Packers at the very least have something out of this 4th round pick. And I do want to say this as well. I think there are plenty of Packers fans, people who cover the NFC North, just NFL fans in general, who may not know a whole lot about Romeo Doubs. Well, let me tell you about the people who do know something about Romeo Doubs, okay? There are some people out there, not to name names, not to use slurs like degenerate, but there are some people out there who on college football Saturdays the last few years may have woken up for an 11 a.m. Central Time game and may have seen Iowa not cover against a team like Purdue. Then at 2:30, maybe you see the big SEC game of the week, and for some reason Florida choked. They couldn't cover a game against Georgia or someone else in the SEC. Prime time, under the lights, maybe it's the Bedlam game, OU versus Oklahoma State. Maybe that didn't go well either, and you're really struggling. But then a beacon, an oasis in the distance, Romeo Doubs and the Nevada Wolfpack covering against New Mexico State late night in the desert to save your day. Not to say that ever happened to anyone. I'm not trying to name names, not trying to incriminate anyone, but that guy out there knows just how good Romeo Doubs is. And they definitely knew this guy had that kind of potential. So I'm excited for Romeo Doubs. I really do think he is going to, I don't want to say he's going to be a special player because that's always kind of a loaded comment, but I really do think he's going to make some level of contribution in his rookie season. But that does bring us, Matt, to Christian Watson and the fact that he's missing key snaps early on. And there's still plenty of training camp left, but we heard comments from Matt LaFleur and they were concerning. I mean, he says, and I'll quote it here, it's tough because there's nothing like getting those live reps. We've got confidence not only in Christian, but in wide receiver coach Jason Vrabel to get him up to speed. And yeah, I have confidence in this coaching staff. I don't know why we wouldn't, but I also think it's fair to say you would like to have your second round pick, number 34 overall, who you are counting on to be a major contributor for this offense. You'd like to have him out there getting as many snaps as possible when he hasn't really played all that much. And he played obviously this entire past season, but 2020 was a shortened year for guys who played FCS football. He had a real boom in his final year at NDSU, but this is a guy who could use some reps. And if you saw the scouting reports about maybe some issues with his hands, you know he could use some more time catching passes from Aaron Rodgers. So I'm not hitting the panic button at this point, but I do kind of side with Matt LaFleur that there's some real concern here about missing this much time early in camp. This is the best part about live podcasting and live radio and live streaming is occasionally someone doesn't have a microphone on or occasionally there's a technical difficulty. No. But that's why we have someone here who does radio for a living because I have to vamp every single day. And that's why I not need to cover for anyone because my co-host is a total professional. But occasionally there's some technical difficulties. And then we get to welcome Matt Freilich back in to talk about Christian Watson missing some snaps here early in camp.
I was going to take a dig at you there, and now I just have to sit back and pretend that fictional story you discussed about a Saturday morning to, I don't know, 1 a.m. Final whistle for the college football. That's just not you. So I'm just going to move on past that. I won't even bring that up, or the fact that I had my mic muted in 2022. I mean, we've been doing this for 2+ years. Let's figure this shit out. So ultimately, I think one of the cool things that you brought up was the FCS shortened season. I think that's great. That's a great call up by you. Secondarily, yeah, there was some talk about Christian Watson having drops issues. Aaron Rodgers throws a pretty hard ball from what I've been told. Third, like, you got to get the reps just like Romeo Doubs is getting, just like everyone else is getting, that they need to compete for that number one spot or potential to be the number one. And also, as a Packer fan, am I hitting the panic button yet? No. But am I searching a little bit right now as we're even recording and seeing what the hell Christian Watson's injury is and what significance it is? Absolutely. I want to figure out why all of a sudden out of nowhere 2 weeks ago, he signs his contract extension and then immediately gets put on the PUP less than 24 hours. Like that's I don't know. That's just concerning. I guess there's really no other way to put it. Like you would expect him to, as soon as he signed that damn thing, have been healthy, and then ultimately be able to be in the damn field. And it's kind of frustrating because you want to see this kid take over. They used a higher draft pick on him than they have in, 15 plus years, et cetera, Javon Walker. And truly, like, I just want to see him, what he can do. Like we've seen him go up against these lesser caliber defenders in the FCS. Let's see him match up against Rasul Douglas, Jair Alexander, or Eric Stokes. Like, that would be pretty entertaining for me, especially too that from the last 5 days, it's really, really been all defensive heavy. Like it's generally the case. Defense comes out swinging, they're high power, they're flying around. Offense is still trying to get the chemistry down with guys. Offensive linemen being subbed out. Truly, it's go after the passer, and they're going to play physical on the edge, right? Like how many flags are getting thrown, you would imagine, in a practice like that? They're going to be a little handsy. But at the end of the day, like, I want to see a big physical receiver like Christian Watson going up and making some, incredible catches like we heard from Juwan Winfrey last week.
I want to jump into the YouTube comments real quick. Trey chiming in and asking, is it possible that Rodgers throws too hard and hurts the wide receiver's fingers? I don't know if he quite does the Brett Favre where he's smashing Antonio Freeman's fingers every time he throws the ball more than 10 yards. But there is something to be said for developing that kind of chemistry. Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams had a good relationship from the beginning, but you didn't have that connection right off the rip. I mean, that takes time to develop. That takes a lot of work. And I'm not saying that Christian Watson's going to become Davante Adams. Davante Adams is the best player at his position in the NFL. I'm just saying you need that time to develop that kind of chemistry. And for a guy who may have some issues with drops, may have some issues with concentration with his hands, does need to make sure he is playing with game physicality. And not that I'm worried that that stuff's not going to come. It just makes me concerned that maybe we're not going to get to see that right from the beginning this year. And that's what I wanted to ask next, Matt, is how much are you going to change your expectations and your hopes for Watson this season, depending on how long he's out from camp? If he comes back even a week from now, I don't think I'm going to change all that much because we're still going to have several weeks of training camp to work through things. He'll have plenty of time to work with Rodgers. I think he'll be okay. But if he misses the vast majority of camp, if he's not able to go out there for at least a couple of the preseason games this year, I might have to rein in some of the hopes. I think that there's not a massive role you're going to ask. You're not going to have him running, he's not going to play 100% of snaps. I guess that's essentially what I'm trying to get at. But, the kind of plays we've seen in the past, either the vertical routes, which obviously with that kind of speed, with that kind of frame, that size, you want him running vertical routes because he's going to be able to, just in terms of physical gifts, beat out a lot of cornerbacks, a lot of safeties. Now, physicality-wise, that's something you have to get used to in the NFL. But you want him running vertical routes. And I think those little flare screens that Rodgers and Adams really connected with on the last couple of years, again, not saying that Christian Watson is going to be Davante Adams, but again, with that sort of natural speed that he has, just getting him the ball in space and saying, okay, catch the ball behind the line, run forward for anywhere between 7 and 12 yards. That's the kind of play where I think you can get him a lot of confidence very early on. And I'd love to see him do that. I just wonder if the longer he's out during this early part of training camp into the middle of training camp, possibly late into training camp, I don't know at this point. I just have some worries that maybe he's not going to be able to jump right into the fire and contribute from the beginning. I'd love to be wrong. I'd love for him to, if he misses all of camp and he comes out and he lights the world on fire week 1, well, then hell yeah, I'd love to be wrong about that. I just have some doubts about that. And I just think that's why he needs to be back as soon as possible. Not rush anything. We know the Packers doctors won't do that, but he needs to be out there taking snaps. I think that's a fair assumption.
Yeah. I mean, he needs to get his butt out there, truthfully. Like, I want to see him perform. There's a lot of pressure on him, in my opinion, because I would imagine Aaron Rodgers is eager to throw the damn ball to a physical receiver like that. They need someone that's an athletic freak or at least some form of speedster too. Like, they don't really have that right now that I'm fully aware of. I don't know how fast Romeo Doubs is, but I know it's not as fast as MVS was. And the comps for Christian Watson and MVS were comparable. No kidding, they're comps. So it would be great if Christian Watson could get on the field, and it would make me a lot happier because I just think he's going to be behind the 8 ball more and more and more, which takes longer for him to get in the offense come the regular season because we know the Packers always have a little snafu right out of the gates. And with all these new pass catchers, it's time to get on the field, but ultimately don't get him back too soon where he stunts him and he loses his confidence because he's worried about cutting or whatever the injury is. And let's just make sure all the receivers that are out there, and there's a lot of them, we're trying to come up with the best combination possible. Let's make sure they're all getting as many reps. And maybe Christian Watson isn't a first-year guy because you mentioned Davante Adams being a stud. Hand up, I was one of those people that said cut him after his first or second year. So I'm an absolute moron.
There were a lot of people who felt that way. I mean, it was not just you. I see you laughing. I almost muted my mic too.
No.
There were a lot of people who felt that way. You are far from. There were people certainly smarter than me who thought that. So I clinged onto it and I thought, hey, give him more time. But that's because I'm also a total homer and a total apologist for literally anyone who wears green in any sporting event. Like I'll latch onto these guys absolutely forever. So I can't hold that one against you because I think a large swath of the Packers fandom felt that same way. After we get to the rookie receivers, I think we need to touch on Allen Lazard as well, because he has also had his name pop up in the news over the last couple of days. And it again is because of comments from Aaron Rodgers. And like I mentioned earlier, Rodgers has been on Lazard from the beginning. I mean, he was an undrafted player out of Iowa State. He gets cut from the Jaguars. He ends up in Green Bay and now has become a featured player for this team. First things first, and I know this is revisionist at this point, and it's so far in the past. I cannot believe this dude went undrafted. I saw him up close and personal when he was at Iowa State and he played the University of Kansas. And granted, a lot of dudes put up huge numbers against KU because we've been absolute ass for over a decade. But the point remains, he was insane. And I thought, oh my God, this dude's going to be great at the next level. And I don't know about great, but he's at least carved out a niche and has been effective in that niche. And you heard from Aaron Rodgers this week that, yeah, he can be a number one receiver. He has put in that work. He's got the mindset, the attitude to get to that point. I saw someone post on Twitter, and I wish I could give the proper credit for it, but I did see somebody post that, hey, go look at Jordy Nelson's numbers from his first couple of years in the NFL. Then go look at Allen Lazard's numbers and look at some similarities there. I don't know if I love the comparison because I do think they are different kinds of players. I mean, Lazard is much more tight end like than Jordy Nelson. Jordy Nelson was much more of a true boundary receiver, even though he could effectively play in the slot. But you understand my point. I don't necessarily think we're going to see the same sort of breakout year from Lazard that those Nelson stats might indicate. But I guess the question is, do you think he can be a wide receiver one, or alternately, do you think he can be good enough that he can at least be relied upon in big situations? Because as much as I hate to bring it up, playoffs last year, San Francisco, we all saw the play. Lazard is open, deep middle of the field, and instead Rodgers tries the deep ball, forcing it to Devontae Adams instead. You understand why you throw the ball to Adams, but do you think Lazard is working his way and can further work his way into a spot where in a jam he can be trusted? We know Cobb sort of has that. I mean, third and Cobb is a very real thing for Rodgers in this offense, but in other situations, in crunch time moments, can Lazard be that player?
Yeah, absolutely. Real quickly too, it is shocking how Allen Lazard was undrafted. Honestly, unbelievable. Like, I knew about him at Iowa State because he was such an absolute just beast of a human being. And I watched, as a degenerate does, 11 a.m. watching an Iowa State let's call it a Kansas game. Why not? Like, or even watching the incredible matchup that is Iowa State. And Allen Lazard flashed for me, and I remember seeing him, and truly, it's one of those guys you think about in October, and you don't think about him forever, ever again, because you saw him on a Saturday morning, maybe a little hazy from the night before, and you kind of just forget who this person is, and all of a sudden they pick him up off the practice squad from the Jags, or he's cut, whatever, and it's like, holy shit, they got a stud here. I know this for a fact because I've seen highlights, and I've gone back and watched those over this last offseason. They still check out. Like, it wasn't like living in the moment of one guy. I mean, granted, they are highlights. It is a compilation of the best plays a human has ever made at the college level for of his career. But he's damn good, man, and I really do think he has a potential. He could earn that number one spot, and it sounds kind of bizarre, but the guy just does the hard stuff without really blinking an eye. He's relied on to be that RPO, that pick man, that blocker, whatever you want to call it. He'll go down and make a tough catch. Now, does he have that straight line speed that Jordy Nelson had in his younger days? And he's going to run away from people? Probably not. He's going to need a little bit of a head start across the middle. But ultimately, I think Lazard is one of those dudes Rodgers sees the physical attributes he has. He understands the journey that he had, that being Allen Lazard, and truly making his way up under this roster and just climbing the depth chart year after year. Like, that's the other thing. If you really think, like, early on, it was like, okay, he's going to make the team probably. And it's like, okay, last year, it's like, oh, is he going to compete for snaps versus MVS? And I predicted last year, to my credit, it's not much because MVS was out for a portion of the year, but I said, I think Allen Lazard could have more yards than, MVS. And if Lazard would have played in or if they both would have played in full capacity, it wouldn't really been a conversation. But at the end of the day, I love Allen Lazard's energy, the way he approaches football, much more than MVS, much more than a lot of other receivers that have came through here, because he's just a gritty dude. He's physically talented, but in the big moment, do the lights get too bright for him? We'll see, but I'm sure he took this offseason to kind of reassess, knowing ultimately, hey, I have to step up. I have to, take the call if necessary, being that number one guy and someone to rely on 3rd and 7, 3rd and 6 to continue a drive, maybe in a cold December game.
I think one of the biggest storylines to follow, and this isn't just a camp thing, it'll come up in camp, but I think just throughout the season, one of the big storylines for this Packers team is going to be the trust that Aaron Rodgers develops with these receivers. We know there is some level of it with Allen Lazard, but can they take that to the next level where in a crucial fourth quarter situation in a playoff game, do you trust that you can throw it to that guy, to big number 13 over the middle? We know he's got the trust with Randall Cobb, but Cobb's game is also limited at this point in this career, and that's fine. He has a role, and he actually played pretty well in it last season in his return to Green Bay, but he's a limited receiver at this point. Can he develop that trust with Romeo Doubs? Can he develop something when Bob Tunyon is available whenever to get on the field? Can that be redeveloped and turned into something? And another player too, and I want to get to some commentary here, some live reaction from both our Game on Wisconsin YouTube and Facebook. Kim on the Game on Wisconsin Facebook mentions that they're hoping Amari Rodgers can take a big step this year. And that's another player that, hey, you've got to develop trust. And I'm not going to give up on Amari Rodgers after 1 year. I don't know what your feelings on the situation are, Matt. I know he really struggled last season, but he also didn't get on the field very much. So who knows what practice looked like versus what he was able to do in game situations. Obviously, special teams really messed with his head last year. That's another one. I mean, you've got to rely on all hands on deck here. And I think that includes the rookies, that includes the vets, and that includes guys like Amari Rodgers who are still trying to find their way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Amari Rodgers is a great player to bring up because he's gotten a little bit of buzz over training camp. He kind of, I think he put out a tweet earlier, maybe 2 weeks ago, just talking about how he really slimmed down. Not that he's a large human being, because he's very compact, but just getting it more solid, right? Get maybe some of that college weight off. You and I know what that is. You know, a lot of ramen, a lot of Doritos, etc., and kind of just getting back to the form that you should be as a college or as a professional football player. Plus, he battled through injury last year. Like, let's not forget that. So, like, what are you going to get out of number 8? I don't know, but I think he's going to be someone that we kind of forgot about. Don't forget that Randall Cobb also was mentoring him the last 18 months and change, whatever the math is on there. I really, really think Amari takes a step this year because he has something that these other guys don't have. We mentioned between Doubs, between Christian Watson, Samori Toure, Sammy Watkins. He has at least some pedigree, some connection with Aaron Rodgers.
Also, David from the Game on Wisconsin Facebook, he mentions that before the core injury, he thought Lazard was going to hit 1,000 yards last season. And that's something to mention, too, that he was dealing with injury a year ago. Sure. And that's always going to be a part of the game. You've always got to be worried about injuries. But again, that comes back, I think, to the point I was making about trust is, okay, Allen Lazard takes a big step forward this season. He's on pace for 1,000 yards. What if he misses 4 weeks with an injury? God forbid that actually happened. But what if he misses time? Do you have enough guys out there otherwise who Aaron Rodgers has an amount of trust in and who just in general this offense has trust in to make plays? And I think that's going to be something very important, whether it's, again, Toure, or whether it's Jawan Winfrey, or whether it's one of the running backs or whoever else it might be. I think that's something to really pay attention to. Also, real quick, before we pivot over to the defensive side of the ball, I do want to make one comment to Jacob Westendorf, the boss man, on the Game on Wisconsin YouTube. And of course, you can also check us out live on the Game on Wisconsin YouTube Monday nights here at 8 o'clock for the final dump. Jacob asks, does Kansas have a football team? I would like you to know, Mr. Bossman and the rest of America, that yes, indeed, the Kansas Jayhawks, winners of the 2008 Orange Bowl, people do forget that, do have a football team, and Lance Leipold, Wisconsin Whitewater legend, is going to lead us back to the promised land, or at least to 6 wins in a season at some point.
Who was the quarterback in 2008? Who was the quarterback in 2008?
That was KU legend Todd Reesing at the time.
Yeah, legend. Absolutely.
Okay, local legend, fine. Still shotgunning beers in the David Booth Kansas Memorial Stadium parking lot to this day. Let's get over the defensive side, Matt. We've spent so much time these first show and a half hours talking about the offense, and rightfully so. But I want to get to a player on the defensive side who I'm very curious to know what your opinion is on him, and I'm just curious in general to know what Packer fans' opinion and hopes and expectations are for Jarran Reed. So as I made clear last week and have said in the past, in case you've missed it before, my day job, I do radio in Topeka, Kansas. We cover the Kansas City market. So my day-to-day job generally is mostly covering the Kansas City Chiefs. So I saw Jarran Reed up close last year and saw every snap that he played last season. And I wouldn't say I was universally disappointed in it. The Chiefs in the first half of the year ran some bizarre personnel packages with their defense that really put Reed in a spot where he wasn't going to succeed because he was never going to be their best interior defensive lineman. That's Chris Jones, who is one of the best 4-3 defensive tackles in the NFL. I mean, he is right up there in a 4-3 alignment with Aaron Donald as among the best of the best. I truly believe that. But for some reason, the Chiefs are putting Chris Jones at defensive end where he was abominable. You should have seen that man try to stop the read option with Lamar Jackson. It was pathetic. And Jaron Reed is left inside. And when he's your number 2 interior guy, I like him a whole lot better than when he's your number 1 interior guy. The Chiefs, halfway through the season, their defensive coordinator, Steve Spagnuolo, said, okay, well, this sucks. This was a terrible idea. We're moving Chris Jones back inside. He'll pair with Reed. All of a sudden, Jaron Reed became a whole lot more productive. All of a sudden, he was making tackles on the inside. He was getting past those eaten up blockers that Chris Jones was taking care of. He was creating some more pressure. He was in the backfield much more often. Well, that's a perfect allegory and a perfect segue into what he's going to be doing in 2022 with the Green Bay Packers. This is now the best defensive front that Kenny Clark has played with since coming to Green Bay, which feels like forever ago, even though he is still so young. He is just such a monster. You want to talk about the elite interior players in the NFL. Dean Lowry last season was better. That was his best year of his career, and he was helped, obviously, a large part because of Kenny Clark being unbelievable on the inside. But on that other end, I mean, you're throwing out Tyler Lancaster and you're throwing out various other guys mixed in. I mean, you just didn't have a whole lot of production there. You bring in a guy like Jaron Reed, who I don't think is a great player by any means, but he is an effective player. And again, in that number 2, you don't have to do everything role, I think can find some success. He's found that over the course of his career so far. I think that this is a godsend, not necessarily for the defense. I do think it raises the floor a little bit to have better, competent play on the defensive line. But for a guy like Kenny Clark, knowing there are competent players at all next to him, but especially on both sides of him, that might set Kenny Clark up to have a career year. And he's already had a couple of career years for Green Bay. I think it is massive for this team to add a body like Reed, who doesn't even need to be great to raise the floor for this defense and to raise the floor for the superstar wearing 97 next to him.
I'll tell you what, man, it's true that gifts can come in all shapes and sizes. I mean, just ask Todd Varney, right? Todd knows what I'm talking about. All shapes and sizes. Just things can come at you fast. So you've been looking for a veteran D lineman to complement Kenny Clark for years. At the very, very most, complement him. Are they going to take away the double team? More than likely not. But Jaron Reed was someone that checked the box for me. It's taken a couple years that they've acquired someone that I feel like they actually can step in and be a D tackle next to Kenny. And you mentioned Jaron Reed last year. I remember watching some Chiefs games in prime time and just seeing early on, like you mentioned, defense just struggling. It just didn't look right to me. And I don't watch every Chiefs game. They are on TV quite often, as you know. Patrick Mahomes, pretty important player for the league to get some eyes on. But at the end of the day, it just didn't seem right off the bat. And Jaron Reed was signed a deal to go to the Chiefs for a 1-year deal. Obviously didn't last very long, but yeah, just trying to find the right rhythm. And they clearly found it last year. And I hope they can find that rhythm right away because similar situation, Chris Jones is a stud for the Chiefs. Kenny Clark also a stud. They have skill sets that can basically play anywhere on that front, but are in a better position to be successful for everyone else around them in certain scenarios. And I think Jaron Reed's going to be able to play that role super well. I think he's going to give you some high-end veteran upside, and he's also going to be able to be a staple there when you have young guys coming up, the TJ Slaytons of the world. You have these other younger dudes that you're going to want to fill in to get some reps because why not? You're going to need those bodies continuously moving. You don't have the luxury of Zadarius Smith with his hand in the dirt once in a while this year. You're kind of one guy on the edge. So ultimately, you're going to have a couple of these guys step up and play really, really well. And I expect big things from both guys I just mentioned, TJ Slayton, but particularly Jaron Reed. Like, he's been in the league long enough. He should know how to play his role at this point. And I think just with all the caliber of dudes around him playing next to some of these cerebral guys like a Devondre Campbell, getting some osmosis from him, Kenny Clark, I mean, Dean Lowry even too. Like these guys they've been in the league for a while. Not that the Chiefs don't have that or had that, I should say. But at the end of the day, I think J-Ron is just someone that I've wanted to see them have for a long, long time. And I don't remember the last defensive lineman that was kind of a D tackle, if you will, I should say. Not even D lineman, a defensive tackle that could take up some space that they acquired. And honestly, the last one I remember, and please someone in the comments correct me if I'm wrong, tweet at me tomorrow, whenever you want to. Brendan, you can tell me right now. The last one I remember was Howard Green. And I know that's sounds like 11 years ago, 10 years ago, which sounds absolutely insane. But if that's accurate, I don't want to be right. I really don't, because that makes me sad. I'm sure there's been a couple other guys along the way, but as far as a notable name that I actually was familiar with before they acquired him that can take up space, J-Ron Reed is it, and I hope damn well he can do that in Joe Barry's defense this year.
And I think it's going to be obviously vital to get depth on that defensive line. I mean, you can't survive all those snaps for 17 games and then into the postseason effectively with just 3 dudes on the defensive line. You trust Lowry's going to do something. Again, not a great player, but he has become more effective with time. Kenny Clark is a superstar, and then Jaron Reed. I mean, you've got a baseline level of competence there. You do need depth, and that's why a guy like TJ Slayton does have to step up, and you're going to need those guys up front to contribute more in the pass rush, for example, because as much as I love the starting 2 off the edge for the Packers, Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, I think that can be an extremely effective and potent pass rush off the edge. Can Kingsley Enagbare step up as a rookie? That's a big ask for him to be that third pass rusher. If you go through slumps with those guys on the edge or they're lacking depth and it comes up and shows, well, you're going to need that defensive line to produce a little bit more. So I think you're going to need to develop that depth, and TJ Slayton is obviously going to be a key part of that, among others. But you throw in a guy like Jaron Reed to this defensive line, you give Kenny Clark that running mate that he just hasn't had. And that's not to disparage the season Dean Lowry had a year ago. I mean, he really did have the best season of his career and played up to that contract extension really for the first time that he got a couple of years ago. But that's not the kind of athlete that I think the Packers have really been missing on that defensive line. They've needed someone else who isn't as much of a freak as Kenny Clark, because he is a monster. And the word freak gets overused so much in football and in sports, but he really is. He is a beast on the inside. You needed someone else athletically who could kind of run with him. And I think getting a guy like Jaron Reed, who is not going to get you 12 sacks from 3-4 defensive end. I mean, he's just not going to be that kind of guy, but can he generate some pressure? Can he take some of the blocks away from Kenny Clark to let Clark be able to do his work on the inside with a single blocker at certain times? If he can do that, that's already a win for this Green Bay team. And I'm excited to see how well they can mesh together from the very beginning. And can they jump into week 1 and immediately start wreaking havoc up front? Because if they can, again, that is a 100% win for Brian Gutekunst and this front office. And with that, Matt, before we get to the end of the show today, it is time for my favorite segment and the favorite segment of degenerates around the world. It is time for Significant to Some. Now, once we get to the start of the regular season and we've got actual games to look at some spreads for, you folks in Wisconsin, you can show up at the Oneida Casino. You can put a bet down on this in Kansas at some point in 2022. We will be able to do that as well. Thank you, based God, for that. But as we are going through this preseason, this training camp, we can look at some player props, some certain things that maybe if you want to put a bet down this season, you can throw a schmeckel or two down on a player prop. And last week we did the team total for the Packers. This week we're going to get to the individual players. And Matt, let's go to the passing game. We've been talking about it throughout the show today. Let's get to Aaron Rodgers and some props for this year. And the first one I've got for you, touchdown passes. 31.5 is the number for Aaron Rodgers. Over under 31.5 TDs for QB12 this year.
I don't remember who it was, but it was someone a lot smarter than me last week mentioned like a statistics for Rodgers this year. Maybe surprise some people, have a little bit more passing yards or passing touchdowns than they would think. And I think it was like, they said 40 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. And I was like, that sounds like an Aaron Rodgers' year. 31, like that seems so low. And I know we keep hammering the point, and I've kept hammering the point of, hey, it's going to be a run first offense. I just, that would seem significant. I know he's coming off back. I mean, I think you're going over. I'm just going to get it out there. I'm dancing around it. I think for sure he's going to get out there. Now, granted, in the last couple seasons here, I think it's I'm really trying to do this in my head here. So obviously excluding 2017, we'll take it out the window, collarbone, etc. He's gone. We don't have to worry about that. From 2014 to 2021, he only didn't surpass that 31 mark 3 times. Now, it doesn't seem like, 3 out of 7 not getting it's not that good. 4 out of 7 guys, hey, that's not a really good bet for you to take. But ultimately, if you look at the ones where he went over, 31 was his lowest. His highest was 48. On average, he was hitting that like mid 40s mark or low 40s, high 30s mark. I think I smashed that over. I don't know why you wouldn't, because granted, he's losing a big target for Devontae Adams of a guy that's going to take a lot of touchdowns. Granted, 2 years ago, it was Robert Tonyan getting a lot of those 48 total touchdowns. But at the end of the day, I think with the collection of receivers and the way that we've seen A.J. Dillon develop in the passing game this training camp, he had a huge catch apparently on Monday at camp. Aaron Jones has continuously developed. I just think 31 is that just seems like you take that money to the bank to me.
I'm with you on the over there. I mean, if you break it down per game, because you've got 17 games to get that now, even if we were only going to get 16 games, I still think I would take the over on this. But you get 17 games, that's 1.85 touchdown passes a game. And there might be a game or two where he only throws one, and the running game, Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon and company, they're able to pound in a few on the ground. But I think those guys are each going to catch a few touchdown passes this season. Aaron Jones, obviously, we know is a good receiver. And I think Dillon, and I think more people have come around on this by this point, underrated receiver. I think he's underrated in that game. He's not going to be running the whole route tree out of the slot or anything, but he can be effective at grabbing the ball out of the backfield. I think each of those guys is going to catch a couple of touchdown passes this year. Tonyan is going to catch a few. He's obviously a good red zone weapon. Lazard, huge body in the red zone. I have a hard time seeing it going under. Now, if you told me it was even 34 or 35 and a half, I would say, okay, I think there's an argument there, because you are going to get plenty of use out of the run game, RB1, RB2, and whoever ends up getting that RB3 job. That number I'd be a little more cautious about, but so low in the 30s, I don't know how I could possibly go under. And I know you go back over the last 7 years, Matt, like you mentioned, and there are a handful where he did go under that, but you look at years where he got injured, or the year when he came back from the injury, or that God-forsaken 2015 offensive season that was just a slog to watch the entire year after those first couple of weeks, specifically after that primetime game against Denver. So to me, I can see an argument for why it would go under. And if you are a believer that the regression is coming for a quarterback in his late 30s, and maybe the Panchakarma cleanse didn't actually work and it's not going to pan out going forward, okay, fine. I'm not going to jump on that train, though. I'm sticking with Aaron Rodgers until he proves to me that he can't do it anymore. I'm going to keep riding with him. So the touchdown number, we're both over 31 and a half. Here's the interesting one for you. I think the passing yards number is far more interesting for Rodgers this year. 17 games, 4,100 yards, 4,100.5 yards, over under that total.
That one, I mean, you're right. That is interesting. That one kind of right off the bat kind of was like, okay, that seems like quite a bit. And I'm going to go under. It's to get 4, I guess. No, I think that absolutely is an under. I'm comfortable with going under on that. I think that's a really, really good number by Vegas. I think that's an absolutely sound bet, because it both got us to kind of sit back and pause. I'm sure the first time you read it, the first time I'm hearing it, like, oh, yeah, definitely takes me back a little bit. Last year, we only had 4,115 yards. So how is he going to come up with and replace all of Devontae's yards, and in comparison actually kind of improve slightly to beat that? I think it's – yeah, I'm going under on that one. That's a solid line by the house there.
I'm with you. I'm thinking the under on that too. And that's not to discredit the guy who I just said, I'll ride to hell with him and back. Like I'm still going to ride with Aaron Rodgers, but I feel like there's reason to believe that the Packers, A, just won't get to that total as a team, but B, they're not going to need to pass the ball as much. I think this is, in a way, really dependent on what you believe about this defense. And are the Packers going to be in fewer situations that are obvious must-pass situations this year? And if the answer is yes, I think you're going to end up seeing a defense that is top 10 in the NFL. And given the talent, they absolutely should be top 10 in the NFL this coming season. But I think you're going to see more of the run game. I think you're going to see more of the handoffs. A lot of those pre-snap RPOs are going to end up being handed off to Aaron Jones right up the middle on the goal line or whatever it might end up being. Or shoot, they'd run those not even on the goal line. So I think it's a good number. I think he could get close, and I can obviously see a path in which he would go over that. I mean, last season, he ended up with 41-15, and he only played 16 games of the season. He didn't even get that 17th game since he obviously had to sit against the Chiefs. I think it's close, but I think if you really believe in this defense and believe they're going to be good enough that the Packers won't need to throw the ball all over the yard, I think it's going to be an under. So give me probably right around 4,000, just under 4,000 yards, but I'll take that over on touchdown passes. And that's another MVP caliber season for Aaron Rodgers. And I mean, shoot, I'll take that. If he's doing that, this team is going to be a contender once again.
100%. Like I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm going to say 3,800 yards and 37 touchdowns. I mean, I think he could clip 40. If he's throwing the ball that much, I just think they're not using the players they have on the roster in the proper positions. I just think that's really where I think it falls short. Now, is he going to have some games as Aaron Rodgers does against the Lions? Let's use them as the horse here, beat the hell out of it. Is he's going to have a game where he's going to throw 200 yards, 180 yards, and like 3 or 4 touchdowns? Like, he's going to have games like that. That's just what he does. It's just because it's sometimes in the red zone, it's tough to run the ball. He can find someone in a little quick route tree and just call it a day. So that's 3,837 touchdowns. I'm going to call it right now. Book it.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to you. I'll go a little higher on the yards. I'll go 3,900, and I'll say a few fewer touchdowns. I'll say gets to 34. So we're pretty close on that for this year. We'll keep an eye on that. I'll jot that one down. I'll make sure that come the end of the year we pay attention to that one. But that is going to do it for the second edition in season number 2 of The Final Dump. Matt, we're getting further and further into camp. To put the pads on now. This is when real football starts in Green Bay.
Buddy, dude, I hand up. I went home tonight to grab some things from my old house. I looked at my football helmet, my Packers helmet signed by Lucas Patrick that I won off a Madden game from him, mind you. So shout out to me. I was going to put that sucker on because we started with the pads today. So hand up. I didn't come prepared with the proper uniform. I have a couple sprints after practice, coach.
We'll both get dressed for next week. We'll put the jersey on. We'll get in full uniform for next week as we get deeper and deeper into training camp. We'll be back coming up live Monday night, 8 p.m. Lambeau time, live on the Game On Wisconsin Facebook page, Twitter, and on the Game On Wisconsin YouTube. You can catch the podcast version of the show coming up on Tuesday morning as well, wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, you can follow Game On Wisconsin on Twitter at GameOnWI. Matt is at Matt_FRA_. And you can follow myself at Brendan DZW. Matt, it's been fun. Get ready for another week of training camp coming up next Monday.
Absolutely, sir. Grind out this week. Observe all the other content we get from the Game On Wisconsin family and continue to refresh that Twitter feed whenever you have a brief second just to see what the boys are tweeting about, from Andy Herman, Aaron Nagler, Wes Hockwitz, Paul Brettel, anyone that can make it to camp. We appreciate everyone being our eyes and ears because it makes the day go smoother and it lets us react to something maybe that we shouldn't. But, in August 1st, I'm going to react to whatever the hell I want right now, especially now that we're putting on the shells. We got the whole pads on. Shout out to the newsmakers. Shout out to the news reporters bringing us the content every week. And we'll be talking all about it coming up next Monday night and on next week's podcast. For Matt Freilich, I'm Brendan Dworzinski. We'll talk to you next Monday night and Tuesday morning on the podcast on The Final Dump.
Well, Wayne, I think this is one that Vince Lombardi and George Hallis would be proud of.
You could have given me the touchdown. Then it's hard to overturn. You know what I mean?
I understand.
That was a good effort, though, wasn't it? It was a pretty good effort.